Hello, and welcome back to Two Therapists Walk into a Podcast. I'm Robin Green, an LCSW and therapist in Tucson, Arizona.
And I'm Stephanie Edsel. I'm also an LCSW, coming to you from good old Salt Lake City, Utah.
We're in Series 9, A Year in the Room, and this week we're going back to Episode 4. Healing isn't linear, and that's a good thing. One of our earliest episodes, and one that hasn't stopped being relevant for a single day since we made it.
It hasn't. It stays in our top episodes. And, well, we've been thinking a lot about why.
We think it's because at some point everyone who is genuinely trying to heal has looked at themselves and felt like they were losing ground, like something was wrong with them for really still being here.
We made this episode because we'd both felt that. And we wanted to tell the truth about it.
Let's take a moment to arrive. Whatever today has been, whatever this week has asked of you, taken from you, given back in unexpected ways, you're welcome here exactly as you are. Whatever body you're in, whatever it's carrying, just notice you showed up, and that matters more than it sounds. If a breath feels available, not necessarily a curated breath, just what happens when you give your body a moment of permission. Let it. Maybe something releases, or nothing does. You don't need anything to happen right now. If you're coming to this one in a hard stretch, if healing has felt more like being dragged than walking, then this episode is for you. Really not to fix it, just to sit with you in it for a little while. Let's begin. We started episode 4 and we were a lot brand new at podcasting still. And I remember feeling the weight of it, kind of because we weren't just presenting the information, we were pushing back on something people really want to believe, and that is that if you work hard enough, healing is going to go in one direction and stay smooth.
And it doesn't. It never has. Likely it never will, if I know science. And I think part of what made that episode, that specific one, land was that we were not saying it from a distance. We were saying it because we'd both been inside it. That feeling of, I've already done this work. Why is this back?
That feeling doesn't go away just because you're a therapist.
Dang it, I know.
I want to be honest about that. Honestly, honestly.
Why not?
Knowing the framework doesn't exempt you from the experience.
Not even a little. I actually worry sometimes if somebody hasn't had at least a little bit of experience, before going into this field. It's very important to understand that.
Yes, right. And what we've come to understand more since that episode even is that what the research keeps pointing towards is that what reads is going backward is almost always the nervous system returning to something it now has more capacity to meet. You're not at the beginning again. You're at a deeper layer with more resources than you had the last time you were here.
I like that. The system really can only process what it has room for. When that room grows, and it does grow slowly, sometimes painfully, but through safe experience and time, things that were once too much now are approachable. That's not regression, people. That's the work actually working.
And we want to say something about what healing looks like for people carrying that ongoing stress, systemic, relational, financial, all of it layered together. For a lot of people, healing doesn't happen in a quiet, contained space somewhere separate from life. It happens in the middle of everything, which does mean it looks different. It moves differently, and measuring it against someone else's timeline or against some imagined version of what recovery is supposed to look like is a setup.
It is. Don't fall for it. The measure that actually means something is a personal one. Not am I where I wanted to be, but am I responding differently than I once did? Am I catching something a little sooner? Am I a little less alone in it than I was?
I like that. That's real. That's what counts, even when it doesn't feel like enough.
Here's our nervous system nugget for today. We're talking today about what's sometimes called the spiral model of healing and why it's not just a comforting metaphor. It reflects something true about how the nervous system actually works. The nervous system processes experience in layers. You work through something, you integrate it, life moves forward, and then something brings you back around. Not to the identical place, but to a related one, a layer deeper. So what feels like circling is often descending. You pass the same territory, but you're not the same person passing through it. You have more context, more capacity, more of yourself available than you did before. And the nervous system needs this kind of revisiting. It can't process everything at once. It processes what it can hold, rests, consolidates, and then, when there's more room, it goes back for what it couldn't quite reach before. It's kind of like a buffet. I like to think of it like that.
Which brings us to something we don't talk about enough, the role of rest and pause in healing. The nervous system doesn't integrate during activation. It integrates during stillness. So the plateaus, the quiet stretches, the periods where nothing visible seems to be happening, that's really not stalling, that's consolidation. The work going underground for a while.
We live in a culture that reads stillness as giving up. Don't forget that. They like to call things, like label them as lazy, not productive. That treats pause as something to push through rather than something to trust. And for nervous system healing, that instinct causes real harm. The pause is not separate from the process. It is the process, part of the time.
You're allowed to be in visible growth moment. That's just how this works.
And for anyone whose healing is happening inside ongoing difficulty, inside systems that are not safe, inside lives that don't have a lot of margin, we want to name that healing under those conditions is not slower because something's wrong with you. It's slower because you're doing something extraordinarily hard that deserves to be said plainly. Our coping skill today is a then and now check-in. It's simple, and it's a direct response to that feeling of not having moved at all.
Because when we're in a hard stretch, we almost always measure ourselves against where we want to be, which makes us feel perpetually behind. And so this asks you to measure differently.
Think of something you're struggling with right now. A pattern, a reaction, something that keeps showing up. just one thing.
And now think back 2 years, 5 years, wherever feels honest. How did you handle this then? Not perfectly, just really. What did it look like? What did you do or not do? What did you feel? And how long did it stay?
Then ask, what's different now? You're not looking for a transformation. Remember, you're not looking for anything. Did you notice it a little sooner this time? Did you reach out instead of going quiet? Did you come back to yourself a little faster?
Unglamorous, quiet, barely perceptible shifts count. They count just as much as the dramatic ones, maybe more, because they're the ones that actually last.
I agree. And we do want to hold space for that fact that this check-in isn't always easy. For some people, looking back means looking at a lot of pain. If there's grief in that comparison, grief for what you went through, for what you didn't have, or for how long it took, that does belong here too. You don't have to skip past it to get to the growth.
And often when people actually do this honestly, they find more than they expected. Not because, things are perfect now, but because they've been changing in ways too slow and too quiet to notice in real time. And this is just a way of letting yourself see it, giving yourself that permission. What this episode has changed for me is something I didn't expect. So early in my career, I had supervisors, mentors, people who had been in the room a lot longer than I had. And I remember watching how they sat with someone in pain. There was no urgency in them, no need to fix it or name it or just move it along. They could just be there fully without flinching. And I admired that, the kind of presence that doesn't come from a training or a model. It just comes from having lived enough, lost enough, sat with enough people in the dark to stop being afraid of it. And you can't borrow that. You have to find your way into that. And somewhere in this past year, I've felt myself getting closer to it. And not because I have more answers, because I've stopped, I think, needing them as much.
For me, it's been more personal. There have been stretches this past year when my own healing felt completely stopped, stunted, like I was stuck. I was pissed. I'd have to sit and think, I know how this works. What the hell is going on? Why is this still here? And what kept coming back to me was something actually an old teacher in this field told me years ago, that the ones worth listening to aren't the ones who've figured it out. They're the ones who, I'm emotional, guys, and I'm not going to hide it. They're the ones who keep showing up to their own stuff. Honestly. Authentically. Without the performance of having arrived somewhere.
And now people come to us, which still catches me off guard sometimes. We try to hold that way it was held for us, with humility, with honesty, with a lot of respect for how hard this actually is.
Well put. We're not outside of this. We never have been. And honestly, we both hope that that's always been clear.
This week's reflection question: where have you been measuring yourself against a line that was never yours to begin with? And what would it feel like to put that ruler down, even just for today?
Sit with that gently. It doesn't need to resolve into anything. Just let it breathe.
Thank you for being here for this one, for allowing it to evolve into something deeper for us. And episode 4 meant something when we made it. This episode is going to mean something to us both, I'm sure. And it's meant something different every time we come back to it. And this is no exception. So we hope it meets you wherever you are today.
And thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week. And remember, healing isn't linear, and we're here for the ride. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not a substitute for therapy, medical care, or professional advice.
Listening to this podcast or this episode does not create a therapeutic, clinical, or professional relationship with us.
If you're experiencing distress, physical symptoms, or emotional concerns that feel overwhelming, we both encourage you to seek support from a qualified healthcare or mental health professional.
And if you are in immediate danger or need urgent support, please contact local emergency services or a crisis line in your area.